I want to take the opportunity to welcome everyone to our weekly virtual Drasha and to thank our sponsor of this week's Drasha, Mrs. Selma Wolf, for dedicating the Drasha and the merit of a refuah shlema for her daughter, Naomi Basara. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Naomi, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, will have a complete and enduring refuah. We have the incredible privilege this Shabbos to read the parashos of Matos and Maasei. It's a privilege. Every Shabbos is a privilege. Every time we have the opportunity to learn Torah, it's an incredible privilege. But this is Shabbos Chazak. This is a Shabbos when we finish Chumash Bamidbar. We begin Chumash Devarim Mirz Hashem next week. We know that with the advent of Chumash Devarim, Parashas Devarim is always Shabbos Chazon, Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, but it's also the gateway into the Yamim Norah. And we could feel Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Aseret Yimei Tshuva. We could feel that his Orus, that awakening, already beginning to blossom in the world and inside of us. And in this week's parasha, we find something amazing. We find an interesting halacha. The Jews had just gone to war against Midian and were successful in that battle. So successful that they had come back with captives, they come back with livestock, and they come back with utensils. And so the interesting discussion that ensued was, how do we use the utensils that we took from the Midianites? Do they have to be ready? Do they have to be prepared? Does something have to happen to them in order to make them usable for Jewish use? And so Elazar HaKohen hands down the laws to the Jewish people. This is in Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Elazar gathers all of the soldiers and he says to them, Aches hazov, ves hakesef, es hanechoshes, es habarzal, es habdil. So if you have any metal utensils, what do you do with metal utensils that you got from a non-Jewish individual? Kol davar asher yavo ba'ish ta'aviru ba'ish v'taher, ach b'meini da yischata, v'chol asher lo yavo ba'ish ta'aviru b'mayim. Essentially, Elazar says that when you get the utensil, when you obtain a utensil, or in this case, when you took the spoils of war, and you now have these utensils which came from non-Jewish individuals, in order for you to use them, they must be properly prepared for Jewish use. And how do you prepare it for Jewish use? You must extract anything which was absorbed. Meaning, in halacha, we have a concept called tam ki'ikr. Tam ki'ikr means that flavor is just as significant as the actual item itself. So for example, everyone agrees, of course, that a non-kosher piece of meat is not kosher. When you cook a non-kosher piece of meat in a utensil, that flavor gets absorbed into the walls of the utensil. That absorption is considered to be halachically significant. And therefore, a utensil may not be used for the preparation of kosher food until those absorptions have been removed from the utensil. So you'll ask, how do you remove those absorptions? So Elazar says, essentially, it depends how the utensil is used. If the utensil is used, meaning it's cooked, you use it to cook with fire, so the same way that it absorbed with fire, so too again, you could remove the absorptions with fire. And so for example, if I go ahead and let's say I came back from Midian, and one of the things I brought back from Midian was a grill, a barbecue grill. So again, a grill is something that's used with fire, right? You put a piece of meat on the grate, you have fire that then cooks the piece of meat. So when the fire cooks the non-kosher piece of meat, so the grill absorbs, the grate absorbs the absorptions. So therefore again, what do I have to do? I have to extract those absorptions. How do I extract the absorptions? With fire. The same way that it absorbed with fire, it also extracts with fire. Similarly, again, if I have a utensil, I have a pot. So normally, again, how do you cook in a pot? With a liquid medium, with water. So let's say, again, I usually use this pot to boil up food. If the pot was used for non-kosher food items, that means it absorbed non-kosher absorptions. Those are there in the walls of the utensil. In order to extract them, I must go ahead and heat up water again. In halacha, this is a concept called kibolo kach polto. The way that a utensil absorbs is the same way that the utensil emits. So essentially, however the non-kosher absorption got in is the same medium or same mechanism through which you're able to extract it. So if you have a utensil that absorbed through fire, the only way to kasher it is with fire. You have a utensil that absorbed by being cooked in liquid, so the only way to extract the absorptions is once again to boil up liquid. And pretty much this is the halachas of kashering as we have it to this very day. If you want to know how to kasher utensil, let's say again a person accidentally cooks something non-kosher in a utensil of theirs, or again remember, you could create kashrus problems. You use a milk pot for something meat, or you use a fleshik pot for something milk, whatever it is. Now you have forbidden absorptions inside of that pot. How do you get it out? Very simple. However it got in is the same way that it gets out. Kibolo kach polta. However it absorbs, that is the same way ultimately again that it is extracted. Kibolo kach polta. And in Surah Makidoshim, in Hasidic literature, there's a significant amount of time that is spent on what is the hashkafa of this mitzvah. So meaning, every mitzvah has two parts. Well, it has more than two parts, but for our purposes today, two parts. There is the technical, mechanistic, legal aspects of the halacha. So for here, you have halachas of kashering. So how do you kasher? Kibolo kach polto tam ke'iker. So taste or flavor is significant. Kibolo kach polto, the same way it goes in is the same way it comes out. But there's another dimension to mitzvahs, that every mitzvah has a deeper message, and every mitzvah has a deeper meaning, and every single mitzvah, again, has a life message that is eternal. So what's the message here? So I want to share with you two approaches that we're going to see are really linked in certain ways. The Noam Elimelech of Lezhensk says something so beautiful. I want to quote you his words. He says, Ki kebalo kach polto. The concept of bolo kach polto teaches us, kilomar, kibliya sa'isr shenivlabo, kein tzarech liflot. So the Rebbe says, Noam Elimelech says something amazing. He says, in the laws of kashrus, the same way that the tarfus got in is the same way that the tarfus gets out, the same way that the forbidden substance or forbidden taste is absorbed, is the same way it's extracted. It says Noam Elimelech. What an incredible metaphor for tshuva, for repentance. Im aver b'seiser, yaseh tshuva b'seiser, v'im begali b'farhesya, tzarech tshuva so gam kin lios b'nigle b'farhesya. The Noam Elimelech says, Kibolo kach polto, the way it goes in is the way it comes out, is not just the mantra for your pots and your pans and your grills, but it's a mantra for life. Namely, says the Rebbe, Kibolo, if you do something wrong, I make a mistake, I sin, and therefore again, there are forbidden absorptions inside of me. The same way it came in is the same way it goes out. Now the Rebbe uses this to discuss the model of tshuva. If a person went ahead and publicly committed a sin, so their tshuva, their repentance process, must be done in public as well. Conversely, a person goes ahead and committed an avera privately, the tshuva only needs to be private as well. And the truth is, the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva discusses this very dynamic. Right? The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, this is in Perek Beis Halacha Aleph, chapter 2, Halacha 1 says as follows: Eizu hi tshuva gemura. What is true tshuva? What is true repentance? So the Rebbe says it's very simple. Ze sheba liyodo davar she'aver bo, ve'efshar biyado la'asosu pirish v'lo asa mipnei tshuva. So the Rambam writes as follows: what's real tshuva? What's real tshuva? Real tshuva is when you're placed in the same exact circumstance you were before. Now, the first time I sinned. So the Rambam often gives the example of immorality. Let's say a man sinned with a particular woman. A man and woman, they had a lapse of morality together, or immorality together. And what happens? They sinned. And now that same man and same woman are alone with each other again. And they could just as easily repeat that immoral transgression, but they choose not to. They choose not to. Not because they're too weak, not because they're afraid, but because they recognize that what they did the first time was wrong. And they want to be better now going forward. The Rambam says, that's tshuva gemura. So the Noam Elimelech is saying, what's tshuva gemura? Kibolo kach polto. The way it goes in is the way it comes out. In other words, that true tshuva is being faced with the same circumstances, the same exact circumstances. And the first time I failed, the first time I fell, but now this second time when I'm tested again, I rise to the occasion. When I'm tested again, I don't fail. When I'm tested again, I stand up to temptation. Kibolo kach polto. The way that you sinned, that's the same way you do tshuva. So the Noam Elimelech says it like in a more limited way. If you sinned publicly, you have to do tshuva publicly. If you sinned privately, you have to do tshuva privately. But really, you could take this thing, you could expand it. That what is tshuva? What does the Rambam say? What is tshuva? You know, it's easy to stand in shul and to say al chet, ashamnu, bagannu, to say I'm sorry. But when do you really know if you did tshuva? Says the Rambam. When do you really know? When you're faced with the same exact circumstances, but this time you choose to act differently. This time you choose to live differently. That's tshuva. Says the Noam Elimelech. That's the message. Kibolo kach polto. The same way it comes in is the same way it goes out. The same way you sinned, tshuva is being placed in that same exact situation. And this time, rising to the occasion. And this time, fighting off the urge, fighting off the desire, finding the strength to resist temptation. That's tshuva. Kibolo kach polto. An incredible and profound lesson. And in fact, this Rambam is really one of the cornerstones of tshuva. This is really one of the fundamental cornerstones. And the Rambam writes, it's interesting because on one hand, the Rambam writes that tshuva is really comprised of a variety of different steps, right? There has to be vidoy, there has to be remorse, there has to be confession, there has to be, again, acceptance to do things differently. But the Rambam says the only time you really know if you're a Baal Tshuva Gimura, how do you know that you're a real Baal Tshuva, that you've really done Tshuva? The only way you really know is when you're put in the same exact circumstance that you failed in the first time, and this time I don't fail. That's about Tshuva. That's about Tshuva. Or as the Noam Elimelech says, that's Kibolo Kach Palto. That the only way to kasher the utensil of the self, the only way to kasher the utensil of the self is to go ahead, and the only way you could purge it, to purge the personalistic utensil, is the same way that it became non-kosher to begin with. The same way the non-kosher stuff came in is the same way that it goes out. I sinned the first time. The ability to resist temptation the second time, that's what really purges my personalistic utensil of the negative absorptions. But Rabbi Nachman of Breslov comes along, and the Rebbe says something so incredibly beautiful. And he gives 2 lines. He says, do you know what the deeper message of Kibolo Kachpolto really is? The truth is, here he happens to be discussing a different context, but we'll apply it over here. This is in the Kutei Moharan, Kof Yod Beis. It's a paragraph or chapter or section 112. And the Rebbe says as follows. I'm going to read to you his words. He says, Le'inyan hischazkus lebal yipala adam bedaito. Machmas riboy hapigamim v'akelkulim shekilkul al yidei masav anava amar. So Rabbi Nachman devotes so much time to the concept of ein shum yeyosh ba'olam klal. The Rebbe says, the greatest obstacle that the Jew faces is not sin. He says it's yeyosh, it's despair, giving up on yourself. Because a lot of times after we make mistakes in life, we're ready to throw in the towel on ourselves. Because again, and it's understandable, especially in life, when you make some pretty big mistakes, it's easy just to give up on your life, right? But the Rebbe says you're not allowed to give up. You're not allowed to give up on yourself. And the Rebbe as a whole, you can't give up on yourself. Why not? So here in the Kutei Moharan, the Rebbe writes over here, so the eitzah that he always gave, Rabbi Nachman always gave to people, when they made terrible mistakes and were ready to throw in the towel themselves, was as follows. Listen to this. Ematam ma'amin sheyecholim lekalkel, tamin sheyecholim letakin. If you believe that you have the koach to destroy, to demolish, to mess up, then believe that you have the koach to fix. Imatam ma'amin sheyecholim lekalkel. If you believe that you have the ability to mess something up, lekalkel, to ruin, tamin sheyecholim lesakin. Believe that you have the ability to fix. And Rabbi Nachman says, this is the pshat, kibolo kach polto. If you believe that you have the koach to make something treif, then believe that you have the koach to make it kosher as well. The same way it comes in is the exact way it goes out. Kibolo kach polto. Now I think, my dear friends, everyone would agree that there's not one amongst us who doesn't have the ability to make something treif. I can make stuff treif like nobody's business. I could ruin a kitchen. Could ask my wife about this. I could ruin a kitchen. Give me an hour. Give me an hour. And again, 20 years of kashrus seder will be messed up in the course of an hour. And it's not just true in the kitchen. I know how to mess stuff up. I know how to make stuff treif. I can tell you why. I've made myself treif. I've made others treif. I've treifed up life opportunities. I've treifed up dreams. I've treifed up circumstances. I've treifed it all up. And the truth is, we've all done this. We've all treifed stuff up. People think you only treif up bowls and pans and pots and foods. Not true. The truth is, the stuff you treif up in your kitchen, that's the least of it What's even more dramatic is the stuff I treif up in life. And even more dramatic than that, how much I've treifed up myself. I'm not treif, but I've treifed up myself a lot. I've done so many non-kosher things, inside, outside. I've done so many non-kosher things throughout my life that my utensil, my kli, the me, it's a shtickle treif. It's not so. It's certainly not glad. It's certainly not glad. You probably would not eat of my utensil. That's for sure. That's how treif it is. That's how questionable it is. Rabbi Nachman says you have a choice. You have a choice. You could give up on yourself, and you could say, I'm treif. I'm treif. Or you could say, Kibolo kach polto. While it is true that I am treif, Elazar HaKohen teaches me in this week's parsha that Kibolo kach polto, whatever comes in can always come out. Whatever comes in could always come out. Whatever is absorbed could always be extracted. So while it is true that I have messed up big time in life, and as a result, I've treifed up so much stuff, myself, other people, like we said before, I've treifed up so much stuff. But kibalo kach polto, whatever comes in, could absolutely be extracted. If you believe that you have the power to destroy, believe that you have the power to fix. Tamin sheyacholin l'saking. The problem, says Rabbi Nachman, is we all know that we have the power to destroy, but we don't necessarily believe that we have the power to fix. But that's kibolo kach polto. Whatever comes in could absolutely be taken out. The Noam Elimelech teaching us the Geder Tshuva, like the Rambam says, you're only really about tshuva, when you can only really extract the absorptions when you're faced with the same exact circumstance. But this time, instead of doing something treif, instead of doing something illegal, instead of doing something usher, forbidden, I stand up and I demonstrate strength and resolve. That's how you extract the absorptions. Says Rabbi Nachman, it's something so much more profound. It's not just about tshuva, It's about how you look at yourself. Do you look at yourself as damaged goods and damaged in an irreparable way, damaged to the point of no return? Or do you believe that although you may be damaged, although you may be treif, I remember Parshas Matos. And in Parshas Matos, Elazar HaKohen gave me the mitzvah Hechsher Kelim. In Parshas Matos, Elazar HaKohen taught me that although, yes, tam ki'ikr, that ultimately, again, flavor is real. And there's a residual impact of my actions that remains inside of my personalistic utensil. But lest you think that your kli is treif forever, kibolo kach polto, you can kasher yourself. If you choose to. How you kasher yourself. So that's very personal. Because again, that gets into the nature of the avera, the nature of the sin, the nature of the failure, the missteps. So how you kasher, that every person has to work out a process for themselves. But says Rabbi Nachman, the first step is believing that you are kasherable. The first step is believing that although your utensil may be treif right now, it need not remain treif for the rest of your life. Kibolo kach polto, for whatever comes in, has the ability to come out, has the ability to be extracted. No matter how much impurity I've ingested, no matter how much sin I've ingested, no matter how much tarfus I have filled my personalistic utensil with, I've absorbed it. It's inside of me. Kach polto. I could extract it as well if I find the courage to do so. Ematam ma'amin sheyacholin lekalkel. Because if you really believe, like we all do, that you have the ability to destroy, then believe, tamin sheyacholin lesakin. Believe that you have the ability to fix as well. And so, my dear friends, so many of us over the course of the journey of life, if we're honest, because this is a good opportunity amongst friends to talk openly and honestly, a lot of times when I look at myself, I feel like I've ruined the utensil. Kadosh Baruch Hu put me in this world with such a beautiful, pristine, pure, magnificent utensil. And as a result of a variety of factors, all of which I am responsible for, the utensil has been tarnished and sullied. And all too often I give up on myself and I assume this is it, this is the utensil, this is it, it's treif, it's broken, it's not good. And a simple halacha of Hechsher Kelim reminds us that just because your utensil might be a Midianite utensil right now, your utensil might be filled with every form of tarfus ever known to mankind. Maybe some of us are like that, but it doesn't have to remain that way. Kibolo kach polto. Find the courage to purge your utensil. Find the courage to engage in personalistic change. Find the courage to move yourself forward. Find the courage to extract the stuff you no longer want absorbed in your utensil. Because if you believe, like we all do, that you have the power to destroy and to ruin, believe that you have the ability to fix. Believe that you have the ability to purge. Believe that you have the ability to lift up. Believe that you have the ability to purify. Wishing everyone a good Erev Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.